There's a particular kind of winter morning that I've come to know well in these 7 years of living alone. It starts before light. 4:30, 5 o'clock. I wake up and for a fraction of a second, the same fraction of a second every time, still, after 7 years, I reach toward her side of the bed. And then I remember. And the morning begins with that, with the remembering. I get up. I come downstairs. I start the fire. I make the coffee. I sit in my chair with the cup in my hands, and I watch the dark outside the window slowly soften from black to gray. And I think about Helen, about her specific way of waking up, slow, gentle, like someone who was in no hurry to leave wherever she'd been, about the particular sound of her footsteps on the landing, about the green cup she'd bring me without asking, because after 30 years, she didn't need to ask. Some mornings this is simply grief. Some mornings it's something else, something quieter, something more like companionship with her memory than like absence. The line between the two is not always clear to me, but on the better mornings, I can tell which side of it I'm on. I'm 82 years old. My name is Walter. Helen died in October of 2017. She was 78. I was 73 at the time, though I was 78 myself by the time I really understood how I'd survived it. By the time I could look back and see what had held me. And that's what I want to talk about today. Not the grief. I've talked about the grief in other conversations. Today I want to talk about what held. What stood up when everything else was down. The 5 things that I came to understand over the years between 73 and 78 as the pillars that kept me from becoming something smaller and harder than I wanted to be. This is not instruction. I don't believe in giving instruction to people who haven't asked for it. This is what I found, what I needed, what held me up when I didn't think I could be held. If you've lost someone, if you're in that place, or if you fear that place, or if you love someone who is in it, maybe some of what I found will be worth something to you. Sit with me. The fire is good this morning. The first pillar was the shop. I need to say this carefully because it's easy to misread it. The shop didn't save me because it kept me busy. Busy is not what I needed. Busy is, in fact, one of the ways people try to avoid grief rather than move through it. They fill the hours. They keep moving. They don't let anything settle. And they end up, 2 or 3 years later, still running from something that hasn't been touched. The shop saved me because of what happens in the shop. What happens in my hands when they're working with wood. There's a particular thing that occurs. I've tried to describe it before, and I always fall slightly short of it. When you're doing skilled physical work that you've done for decades, your hands know the work. Your body knows it. The mind doesn't need to run the operation. And so what happens is, the mind gets a break from itself, from the loop, from the griefs loop, and the regrets loop, and the fears loop. The hands are doing what they do, and the mind can just be. It's not meditation exactly. I don't know what meditation is, never done it, wouldn't know how. But it's something like what I understand meditation to try to be. A resting place for the brain, a gap in the narrative. In those first 2 years after Helen died, the shop was the only place where the narrative paused. Everything else, the kitchen, the bedroom, the living room, the yard, everything else was full of her absence. The shop was different. She'd been in the shop doorway watching me work many times. But the shop was fundamentally mine. It was where I went to be Walter the carpenter, rather than Walter who no longer had Helen. And in the shop, for an hour or two, I could be that version of myself. I want to tell you about the first time I went back in there after she died. It was about 2 weeks after the funeral. I'd been in the house for 2 weeks straight. I'd seen the children. The neighbors had come. The casseroles had come. The cards had come. And the house had become, not suffocating exactly, but close to it. close to the feeling of being pressed on from every side by grief and condolence and other people's care. I put on my coat one morning and I walked to the shop. 30 steps from the back door. I opened it and stood in the doorway for a minute. The smell of it hit me, the way a smell from childhood hits you. Immediate, physical, pulling the whole past with it. I walked in. I didn't do any work. I just stood at the workbench with my hand on the bench top, and I looked at the tools. The plane on the shelf, the chisels in their roll, the marking gauge Helen had given me for Christmas in 1989, still in the same spot I'd put it then. I stood there for about 15 minutes, and then I went back to the house. But I'd been in there. I'd been the carpenter for 15 minutes, and something had rearranged itself slightly. The shop became, over the months that followed, the place I went to be myself when I wasn't sure who I was without her. Not every day, but often. And the making of things, the toy boxes, the cutting boards, the small repairs around the house that couldn't be deferred forever. The making was a way of saying, I am still a man who makes things. That part of me didn't die when she did. That part is still here, still capable, still putting joints together that will hold long after I'm gone. That matters more than it sounds. When you lose the person who was the center of your world, you need to find what's left of you. The shop was where I found some of it. The second pillar was one I hadn't expected. It was the grandchildren. I want to be specific about this because the general version, family keeps you going, is true but too vague to be useful. The specific version is different. My 4 grandchildren, at the time Helen died, ranged from about 10 to 20. Lily, the oldest, David's, was in her late teens when Helen died and is in her mid-20s now. David Jr. was around 14. Susan's 2 girls were 10 and 12. In the months after Helen died, these 4 young people did something for me that I'm not sure they knew they were doing. They pulled me forward. Not by needing things from me exactly, not by giving me tasks, but by being in the world in a way that I found I wanted to watch. Lily was starting college. She was figuring out what she was going to study, what she cared about, who her people were going to be. David Jr. was deep in the particular intensity of 14, where everything is urgent and enormous. Susan's girls were reading books and playing sports and talking about things at the supper table that surprised me with their specificity, their particular angle on the world. I found I was curious about them, genuinely, deeply curious. Not in a grandparent performing interest way, in the way you're curious about things that are still unfolding, that you can't predict, that have their own direction and momentum. And that curiosity, the simple fact of being genuinely curious about what happens next in another person's life, is one of the things that pulls you forward. It's hard to be fully inside your own grief when you're also genuinely wondering what Lily is going to decide about her major, or what David Jr. is going to do about the situation with his baseball coach, or what Susan's youngest said to the teacher that got her into trouble and then turned out to be exactly right. The grandchildren gave me reasons to be interested in the future. Not philosophical reasons, specific ones, small ones, real ones. I want to tell you about a specific afternoon because the general version of this, grandchildren give you purpose, sounds true but doesn't quite capture what I mean. It was the spring of 2019, about 18 months after Helen died. Lily had come up for a week, and we'd been spending the evenings together after supper. She was 18, almost 19, about to start college in the fall, and she was in the particular state of someone who is standing at a very large door, about to go through it, and who is excited and terrified in approximately equal measure. One evening she asked me what I'd been like at 18. Not what I'd done, where I'd gone, what the town was like, what the world was. What I'd been like, internally. I sat with that for a minute. Nobody had asked me that in a long time, maybe ever. And I told her. I told her I'd been arrogant in the way young people who have learned hard things early can be arrogant. I thought I understood more than I did because I'd had to grow up fast after my father died. I told her I was quick with my hands and slow with my emotions, and that I spent a lot of my energy on the work because the work had clear feedback and the rest of life often didn't. I told her I didn't know how to be still, and that not knowing how cost me things I didn't even notice losing at the time. She listened to all of this with that particular quality of attention she has, the kind that makes you feel genuinely received. And then she said, "You sound like David Jr." I thought about that, about whether she was right. She was, partially, and that partiality was interesting. The things that had changed and the things that hadn't. We talked for another hour about what I'd learned and what I wished I'd known, and what I thought she was going to learn, and what I thought she already knew that I'd been slower to find. When she went to bed, I sat in this chair for a long time. Not from grief, from the particular fullness that comes after a conversation where something real has passed between two people, where the generation got bridged in both directions. She'd asked me backward into my own past, and I'd looked forward into her future. That's what the grandchildren did. They made me look in both directions. And in the looking in both directions, I was living in time, in all of it, in a way that the grief would have otherwise prevented. I wasn't only in October 2017 in the hospital room. I was also in Lily's eyes on the question she'd asked. And that reaching in both directions is, I think, one of the things that keeps a person intact through loss. But I want to be honest about what I said earlier, that I wasn't a wonderful grandfather in those first years. I want to add something to that. There was an afternoon when Susan's youngest, Cora, came to visit with her mother. Cora was about 12 at the time, and she was full of something she'd been reading about, some fact about birds, the way certain birds navigate by the stars. She'd learned it in school, and she wanted to tell someone about it, and she chose me. I was in the early part of the grief, the part where everything costs too much. And I listened to Cora, and I nodded, and I said, "That's interesting," which is what you say when you're not quite tracking, but trying to be kind. And she looked at me for a second with that particular look that children have when they know they've been only half heard. And she went quiet. I think about that afternoon, about what I gave her instead of the attention she deserved. I don't think she holds it against me. She was 12. Children are forgiving. But I carry it as a reminder of what the grief was costing in those early years. Not just me, but the people around me. It got better. The attention got fuller over time. But I didn't get there by deciding to be present for the grandchildren. I got there because their specific reality, the bird navigation and the college questions and the baseball coach trouble, slowly pulled me out of myself and back into the world. They did the work, mostly. I just had to stop resisting it. I wasn't, in those first 2 years, a wonderful grandfather. I was a grandfather who was also a grieving man, and those two things were often in tension with each other. The grandchildren would come, and I'd be glad to see them, and also I'd be tired in a way that came from the inside rather than from physical exertion. And they'd sense it. Children sense that kind of tiredness even when you're trying not to show it. But they came back. They kept coming. And gradually, over months and then years, the tiredness was less the dominant thing when they were there. The curiosity got more room. And the curiosity, given room, became one of the main things that made getting up in the morning feel purposeful. The third pillar was this: one honest conversation a week. Not more than that in the first couple of years. I didn't have the capacity for more. but one real conversation where something true was said, where someone actually came into contact with what was actually happening inside me. That was essential. Not optional, essential. The person who made that possible for the first few years was Susan. She'd started calling every Thursday evening a few months after Helen died. Not because we'd discussed it or set it up formally. She just started calling. And at first the calls were surface. How are you doing? How's the house? Have you been eating? The check-in call. The call that's about duty as much as desire. But somewhere around month 6 or 7, something shifted. I remember the specific Thursday. She'd called, and the check-in portion of the call was done, and instead of wrapping up, she said, "Pop, tell me something true." I didn't know what she meant at first. I said, "I'm fine, Susan." And she said, "No, I mean something actually true, something you're actually thinking about." I held the phone for a moment, and then I told her. I told her about the mornings, the fraction of a second when I reach for Helen and then remember. I'd never told anyone about that. I'd been carrying it as a private thing, assuming it would be too much to say, assuming it would frighten her. She listened. She didn't say anything for a moment after I finished, and then she said, "That happens to me too. When I wake up, I have a second where I think I can call Mom today, and then I remember." We sat in that for a minute, the two of us, my daughter and I, on a Thursday evening, 700 miles apart, her in Boston and me in this house. Both of us in the same fraction of a second, 700 miles apart. That conversation changed something. Not just that one conversation, what it opened. The Thursday calls became, over the months and years that followed, one of the primary ways I processed what was happening to me. Not therapy, not analysis. Just a weekly conversation where something real was said, where I could put the true thing into words and have someone hold it with me. What I've come to believe is that grief needs language. Not all the time. Much of grief is rightly silent or wordless or expressed in the way you stand at the workbench and put your hand on the surface. But sometimes it needs to be said, put into words, handed to another person. And in the saying, the thing changes slightly, becomes more manageable, more survived. One honest conversation a week, with one person who can hold it. That was the third pillar. I want to add something about what made Susan the person who could hold it, because it wasn't just that she was willing. Willingness alone doesn't do it. The person who holds your grief has to be able to sit with it without either trying to fix it or collapsing under the weight of it. They have to be able to say, "That sounds hard," or "I'm glad you told me," without immediately pivoting to a solution or dissolving into their own grief to the point where you end up holding theirs. Susan had that. It's not a common thing. It's part of why she became a nurse, I think. She's comfortable with difficulty, comfortable in the room where the hard thing is happening, without needing to make it stop. What she gave me, on those Thursday evenings, was a room where the hard thing could be, where I could say the fraction of a second story, or the story about the first time I went back to the shop, or the story about the feeder, and she would receive it without flinching, and without immediately making it into something to be fixed. That room, the Thursday room, the one that opened when she said, "Tell me something true," was the room where I began to be able to know what I was actually going through. Because when you say it to someone who can receive it, you hear it yourself differently. You understand it differently. The inside thing, once it's outside, has a different relationship to you. I've thought a lot about what it would have been like to go through those years without that room, without the Thursday calls, without the one person who could receive the true thing without flinching. I think I'd have been much more alone, and alone with grief, completely alone, the grief held only internally, never put into language with another person, is a particular kind of alone that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Find the person, the one who can hold it. Tell them the true thing. Not everything. One true thing at a time is enough. Let them hold it with you. I know how that sounds, and I'm going to say it anyway because I think it was true. After Helen died, I was in danger of stopping noticing things. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the incremental withdrawal of attention from the world, from the things in it that were beautiful or interesting or worth stopping for. That was happening. And if it had continued unchecked, I think I'd have become a man who moved through the world rather than lived in it, who got through the days rather than inhabited them. What stopped it was small. It was a chickadee, the feeder outside the kitchen window. Helen had kept it filled. After she died, I let it go empty. For about 4 months, the feeder was empty. I walked past the window every day, and I didn't think about the feeder, and I didn't refill it. And then one morning in January, in the second winter after her death, I looked out the kitchen window, and there was a chickadee on the empty feeder. He was looking at it, looking at the empty thing, with a kind of patient attention that I found for some reason unbearable. I put my coat on, and I went out in the cold, and I got the seed from the garage, and I filled the feeder. It took about 3 minutes. The chickadee came back the next morning, and the morning after that, and I found that I was waiting for him, that the 5 minutes I spent at the kitchen window watching the feeder in the morning had become the thing I got up for, the small, specific thing, the chickadee with his particular way of landing, the way he took a seed and flew to the birch branch to open it, the way he sometimes sat there for a while after, looking around at the yard. That's a small thing. I know it's a small thing, but it was the beginning of the practice of looking, of noticing, of letting the world offer me something every day, even on the days when I wasn't sure I wanted what it was offering. Helen had this practice naturally. She pointed at things, stopped on walks to look at things, ran her hand along the bark of a tree in the way I'd run my hand along a piece of interesting wood. She was always pointing at what was there, always saying, "Look at this, look at that." After she died, I had to take over the pointing. Not for someone else, for myself. I had to become my own noticing, my own look at this. I started a list, simple one, on a yellow legal pad in the kitchen drawer. At the end of each day, I wrote down one thing that had been beautiful or interesting or worth noticing. The chickadee, the particular quality of the frost on the inside corner of the shop window one morning, the smell of the fire catching when I use good dry birch, the way the afternoon light goes golden in November for about 45 minutes before it's gone. Over the years, the list has become its own object, a record of what the days have actually contained. On the bad days, on the February mornings when the cold goes deep and the dark goes on, I can open the pad and see what the other days looked like. And the other days, it turns out, have always had something in them, even the hard ones, even the ones that felt like mostly nothing. The practice of noticing beauty, actively, deliberately, as a discipline, was the 4th pillar. It kept the world offering me things. It kept me available to receive them. The 5th pillar was the hardest to name, and the one that took the longest to find. I was closer to 78 than 73 by the time I understood what it was. The 5th pillar was choosing to be a living archive of Helen. Let me say what I mean. In the first years after she died, one of the things I feared, alongside all the other fears, alongside the grief and the loneliness and the uncertainty, one of the things I feared was that she would disappear. Not her memory in my own mind. My memory of her is full and specific and doesn't feel at risk. But the living presence of her in the world, the way she was real to the people around me, the way her name was spoken, the stories of her, the particular way she saw things, the things she said, the things she loved. I was afraid those would fade, that as the years went by and the people who'd known her moved on with their own lives and their own losses, she'd become an absence with an outline rather than a presence. A photograph on the shelf, a name mentioned less often. I started doing something about it. Not in a planned way. It began by accident and became deliberate over time. I started telling stories about Helen, to the grandchildren especially, but to anyone who would sit still for it. Not the big formal stories, not Helen the person, the whole life summarized. The small ones, the specific ones, the ones that only I had. The way she'd put her hand on my arm when she could see I was about to say the wrong thing to someone. The way she'd make extra potato soup and leave it on the porch of a neighbor she knew was struggling. The conversation she'd had with David Jr. when he was 11 and struggling in school, where she'd told him something that he's told me he still thinks about. The fact that she'd kept a green notebook for years with a list of the things she was grateful for. The fact that the last thing she said to me, the last thing clearly before the sedation made speech too difficult, was something about the lupines, whether they'd come up that June, whether I'd check on them for her. I told these stories, and I watched what happened when I told them. The grandchildren leaned in. Lily took notes sometimes on her phone without me seeing. David Jr. would ask questions I didn't expect. What did she mean by that? What happened after that? What did she say back? Susan's girls would get a look on their faces when I talked about their grandmother that I can only describe as the look of people meeting someone important for the first time. She was becoming real to them, not a photograph, a person, a specific person with specific ways of being in the world. And I realized, slowly, that I was the person who could do that for her. Not the only person. Susan carries her. David carries her. But I was the one who had 54 years of the specific and daily. The green cup and the lupines and the hand on the arm and the extra soup on the porch. I had those in a way nobody else did. Being the archive of her, the living, talking, telling archive of who she actually was, became, by the time I was 78, one of the central purposes of my remaining years. Not the only one, but a real one, a specific, concrete, irreplaceable one. She stays in the world as long as I tell the stories, and the telling keeps me connected to her in a way that is not exactly grief. It's more like an ongoing relationship, a continuation in a different form. That's the fifth pillar, and the most important one for me. I want to tell you about one specific story I told and what happened when I told it, because the abstract, I became her archive, is easier to say than to show, and showing is what makes it real. It was last Christmas. David and Susan and the grandchildren all came. The house was full in the way it only is at Christmas. Loud, complicated, the kitchen always occupied, people sleeping in every room. And on Christmas Eve, after supper, we were all in the living room by the fire, and Lily asked me to tell them something about Helen that none of them had heard. I thought about it for a minute, and I told them about the summer of 1982. Helen had a neighbor that year, a woman named Dorothy Chambers, who lived at the end of the road, who had been through something difficult that spring. Her marriage had ended badly. She'd been left in a situation that was embarrassing as well as painful, the kind of thing that people didn't talk about much in 1982 in Bangor. And a lot of the neighbors were treating her with a kind of careful distance. Not unkindly, just carefully. Helen noticed, and she started walking down to Dorothy's house every Tuesday afternoon. Not for any stated reason, just to visit, to sit and drink coffee and talk about nothing particular. For about 3 months, every Tuesday. I didn't know about it until Dorothy mentioned it to me one day at the hardware store. She said, "Your wife has been very kind to me this summer." I said, "What do you mean?" And she told me about the Tuesdays. Helen had never mentioned it to me, not once in those 3 months. She'd just been going, quietly, every Tuesday, because someone needed someone to come. That's who she was. That's the thing I told the grandchildren, and I watched their faces as I told it. David Jr., who is 20 now and building his own ideas about what kind of person he wants to be, went very quiet at the end. And then he said, "I didn't know she did that." He didn't know, and now he does. And he'll carry that, the Dorothy Chambers story, the Tuesdays. He'll carry that forward into his life, into whatever choices he makes about how to treat people who are in difficult situations. The story will be in him. That's what I mean by living archive. It's not memorial. It's transfer. The things she was, the way she moved through the world, her particular quality of noticing who needed someone to come, those things transfer through the telling into the people who hear them, and they persist. She's not in the ground, she's in. Lily's notes, and David Jr.'s quiet, and Susan's Thursday calls, and the way I fill the feeder every morning. She's distributed through the people who loved her, who keep being changed by her, even now that she's gone. That distribution is what the living archive does, and maintaining it, actively, by telling the stories whenever someone will sit still to hear them, is the work I'm most certain will matter after I'm gone. I want to say something about the 5 pillars together before I close, because individually they each made sense, but together they made something I want to name. The shop gave me back myself. The grandchildren gave me a reason to be interested in what comes next. The Thursday calls with Susan gave me the language for what I was going through. The practice of noticing gave me the world to move through rather than be trapped inside my own interior. And the living archive of Helen kept her present in a way that changed the grief from pure absence into something more like continuation. Together, they gave me a life. Not the life I'd had before, a different life, smaller in some ways, deeper in others. I'm not going to tell you those 5 things will be your 5 things. They're mine. They fit my particular grief, my particular formation, my particular history. Your 5 might look completely different, might involve people I haven't mentioned, places I don't know, practices I haven't found. But I believe there are 5, or 3, or some number of specific, real, daily things that can hold a person up when they've lost what they thought was the only thing holding them. I believe this because I found mine. Not quickly, not without cost, but I found them. And if you're in that place, if you're in the early part of the loss, when everything looks like it can't hold, I want you to know that the things that will hold you exist. You just haven't found them yet. And finding them takes time. And the time is survivable. I survived it. I'm still here, still finding things worth getting up for, still filling the feeder, still telling the stories, still building things that will outlast me, still here. If anything I said today reached you, you can subscribe to walk with me a while longer. I read every comment. Tell me about the person you lost. Tell me one thing that has held you up. I'd like to know. Take care of yourself. Fill the feeder. Tell someone a story about them today. The fire's still going. I'll see you next time.